So this is me starting the recording for the Gauntlet Hangouts Q&A, where we're going to be answering some questions, and we're having a conversation about running for the Gauntlet. One of the things that I do to keep myself straight is I always try to ask questions to the group before I start recording and say that, okay, before we start recording, that reminds me to start recording. That is the way I've been able to remember actually hitting the record button, because I know some people forget that. So that is a common thing. So I want to go through some mechanical bits, the sort of hard things that if somebody's come here going, okay, I want to run for the Gauntlet, or I want to run and play online, how do I do that? So there will be a little bit of lecture to this first part of this. But we have with us Asher, who recently played with me for the first time. And then Justin. Justin, if you had a chance to play with the Gauntlet, I don't keep track of everybody.
No, I just joined up at the higher level recently. So
okay, well, awesome.
A couple times online with my own groups.
Okay, yeah. So you have had experience of playing online and finding out all the delightful challenges of that. And then Lloyd, a veteran a gamer, and of course our British ambassador to the gaming community there. So there we go. And then Michael Barford, who I played with a lot, and Michael Mendoza, who I've also played with several times. So we've got a nice crew here. I have put this in the broadcasting, which is not something I normally do, but if you're like, got up early on a Saturday morning, you're like, what's this thing in my G Plus feed? Feel free to ask questions. If they're obscene, I'm not going to ask them to the group. So that'll be something we're going to do and not do. So the Gauntlet Hangouts, Gauntlet community is an online community, and we do online games, various aiming towards indie games and OSR games. And we have two different communities, one for this general Gauntlet and one for the Gauntlet Hangouts. Hangout 1 advertises our games. We love to have people come in and play. We'd love to have people come and join us to GM. I want to talk about those procedures. One of the things is, if you're thinking about coming and running for the Gauntlet, we ask that you play at least a couple of games with us before you decide to run. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is so that you can know what the play community is like, so that you can come and see how we do things, what the players are like, get a sense of that. Because I have played in some online games that have a very different sense of community, a very different play style than what I get at on the Gauntlet, and that's always kind of a shock to me. And quite frankly, we also want to make sure that people are kind of committed, that they've said, okay, I'm taking the time to try it out before I just jump in and run something. Generally, for our games, people post them about 4 weeks ahead of time or more. Right now, we're getting towards the end of February, so people are going to be posting games for, gosh, we're going into May. We're going to be posting games for that. That's an important thing for us. It means that we're scheduled out. People can see what the games are. And if you sign up, you've kind of made a commitment to that. There is a process for setting up those games on the calendar. If somebody has played with us and they want a GM, they can contact me and I can get them set up as an event creator. If people have questions about how to do that, I can stop off and go through that after a bit. It's a standard thing. We also ask people to probably contact your players ahead of time. I usually hit people up about a week ahead. You can do that by looking at your sign-up list and seeing the emails there. That's another thing I can go through on the process if you want, and telling them what to do. Now, have all of you who are here present set up a Gauntlet Hangout, or rather just a YouTube Hangout call. I know that Lloyd and Michael are familiar with that. Is that something that you want me to talk through how to do that? There's a thumbs up from Lloyd. So I'll take his thing there. Okay. So the YouTube has made it more difficult to set up events, but it is still doable. When you go to YouTube, to your account, logged in, you'll go to the little icon that's in the top right-hand corner, and you'll go down to Creator Studio. And that will bring you up your dashboard for creating events, for setting up incidents, for doing all of that. On the sidebar, on the left-hand side, there is live streaming. And under live streaming, we can have two different options. And Lloyd makes a good point here. I'll screen share so you can see what is going on with that. So this is your Creator Studio. You can see there on the left hand, we have the live streaming. We have the events that are shown there. So we hit events. And then over on towards the right, you can see hit create new live event. And I think I can pull this up without causing a problem. I'll show you what the information is here that's important. Got a title. You're going to want to put that in. You've got the descriptor and the tags. You can put that in as you wish. You can set it to be public or private or even unlisted. So if you set it to public, it means it's doing what it's doing right now. It's actually streaming out onto there and people can watch it. If it's a long thing, it'll actually take a while to buffer and you may only get the first 15, 20 minutes of something. If you set it to private, as I normally do, then it will record privately to your channel. And later on, you can say, now I'll make it public once I've added in the details and once it's processed. And then when it's done, you just hit go live now, if that's what you want to do, if you want to do that event now. The other thing you can do is you can actually set up here on the calendar to create the event ahead of time. I know Tyler, for example, creates his events ahead of time, gets them set up that way. So you can set it out, a week in advance and such. So that's the basics on getting that. Once you hit create event, then you'll, let me leave this channel there. Let me stop screen sharing that. Once that happens, then you'll be popped to the thing. Tie that into Google somehow. In what sense, Asher?
Like the event?
Yeah, so one of the things is that they still have Google Events as a thing, but they've depreciated that. I know Rich actually creates events and then ties that in. I don't do that, so I'm not certain how you make those connections now. Rich usually uses the events as a way to alert people that they are there. But what I do is, and I'll screen share this real quick. Once I get into the event, we're about to get a little one of these things here. Once you're in, you'll see that we've got this invite people icon here. You can click that. It'll give you a link that you can share via email, and anyone who goes to that Hangout link can use that to get in. Or you can drop everybody's email addresses in here into this section. And when they're in there, then you can hit invite. So, for example, if I were to put Sherry's name in there, and then I would send an invitation, and then it would zoom back magically. So that's the tool there. Other tools are, of course, you've got mute microphone, turn camera off. This is the bandwidth usage. In case you're having technical problems, you can lower your bandwidth. It's a good way if you're having connection issues to make that work better for you. And then, of course, settings if you're having problems with the settings and microphones and so on. I don't know if that answered your question about the Google Plus. They used to be that we could easily set up events, tie them into a particular video, and then send that invite. But they've really made that much more difficult.
Yeah, I was just seen people confuse like which hangout to use, right? Like sometimes they'll set up a hangout for before the game and then during, and then someone else sets one up. So
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. One of the things I've taken to doing when I write up my event description or I tell people is I say to them, I'm going to send you a link ahead of time. And then I generally send them via the Hangouts as you guys got today. And then I also send them via email to double up on that. So because we do have a couple of different methods to get to those. I think those are the sort of the big setup things, the big questions on that. So let me.
There was one thing I wanted to add about those live events is that you don't necessarily need to make it live. You don't need to broadcast it. You don't need to record it if you don't want to. But setting it up through there instead of just Hangouts gives you a few extra tools that you can use. Like over here on the side with one of the options is the control room. That's something that you don't get if you just do a regular Hangout. And that can be really helpful if you're facilitating a game. One of the options on there is to adjust people's volume, like you see there on the right. So if you have someone whose microphone is coming in a little quiet or even a little loud, you can adjust that for people. So if someone is having a little bit of trouble getting enough volume in their mic or whatever, you can turn that up for them. If you were just doing it through hangouts.google.com or whatever, as opposed to through YouTube, you don't get to use all those tools. So
yeah,
I would do that even if you don't want to record it and put it on YouTube later, you know.
One of the things that Rich, for example, does is even on the games that he's not recording for public presentation, and he checks with the players. You always want to check with players that this is okay beforehand, is he records it so that he can refer back to it later. He keeps it private so he can refer back to it and watch it. And he uses that as a substitute for notes because Rich hates taking notes. He really does. And he wants everything to be super easy. So he wants it all in video format. And we all love Rich. Interesting thing is that control room is one of the few of the tools that they've not destroyed for Google. If you've watched our other videos, you may have seen that people have those lower thirds down at the bottom, and those are gone. They have removed that as a thing you can do natively within the Google Hangouts with the Google Toolbox. It's still an app that's there, but it is incredibly finicky. Some people can get it to stay up. Some people can't get it to do it. It's a video dysfunction within the process there. Let me see what else I wanted to talk about. I think those are the basic things I wanted to go out for anybody who's just tuning in for the first 15 minutes. Those are the tech bits I wanted to hit. So let me ask you if you have questions about running for the Gauntlet that you want me to answer, questions that you have about running online, best practices, or about anything, and we can kind of throw that open here for you. If anybody has anything that they want to talk about. Justin, I know you said you've run online. Have you run standard Hangouts, or have you run with Roll20 or what?
We tried, so I just started a couple months ago doing some regular games with online with people, and we tried Roll20, and we had a lot of issues with people who had limited bandwidth. Audio worked okay, but video just didn't work for those people. So we've also tried Skype, which seemed to work okay, and then Hangouts, but we still run into some issues with both of those with certain people. If their connection, like if their Wi-Fi is in a really crowded area and their connection isn't strong enough.
Yeah, I've had some people play from hotel Wi-Fi, and so I know what you're talking about there. And generally, those people, we have them turn their bandwidth down as far as they can, and turn video off, so it's just audio only, even if other people are playing with video, and sometimes that helps. But yeah, Roll20, I love the map tools there, but the audio and video is really tough. It can be super problematic. So questions, anybody? But this is a Q&A, so I want to leave it open. Oh, look there, Lloyd actually wrote a question in the chat there. Explain the RSV planning of items throughout people's messages. Okay.
Sorry, that came out really wrong. Can I rephrase that?
So let me have you rephrase that.
Could you explain the RSV plan of people's games? The RS, like you input games on the Hangout. There's a 1 week wait for people on the Hangout stuff before everyone else gets that.
Good question.
And it's possible to reserve a spot for someone who isn't part of that if you want to run the game for them that way instead.
Yeah. Let me screen share and show you what if you're setting up for a Gauntlet Hangout event, if you're an event creator, what that's going to look like here. So this is the all events page for the Gauntlet Hangouts. And this is the page where someone, if you're going to make an event, you'll go to. So you'll hit new event and it'll bring up this information here. Title is obvious, max number of users. Then you see the thing that Lloyd is asking about. This is all access time. One of the things we've done to support the Patreon and help out, build the community is people who back the Patreon at the $7 level or above get a week advance sign up time to create that. So today is the 24th. So if I went to the all access time, I would set it for next Saturday. And that means at that point in time, a week out, anyone could sign up for the event. So until that goes to that all access time, it's only the $7 Patreons who are going to be able to do the sign up on the list. The next thing, of course, is the event start date. I only mentioned this because I'll do this and then I'll walk away and forget to actually set the time, which is down at the bottom part here. That is a very common error that I make. We also got the event picture that's going to make things a square. So that's just to tell you about that. So that's the thing with that is why you want to do that with that that week out for that. Now, the other question that you had is, can I reserve a seat for someone in a game? It is, yeah, we do. That is permitted. That if you have somebody that you'd like to have in there, we ask that you do that sparingly. But I will admit that I have done that for Sherry on a number of occasions, just because I want her to be in the game, or is it something that she's asked for? But generally, otherwise, we ask that it be open table. Does that seem like a fair answer, Lloyd? Okay. So you ask about the must you make an all access time when you're creating an event. That is something that we do if you're putting it on the calendar and putting it out there that far in advance. We do ask that you do that all access time for the event. A week out is what we've told the Patreon patrons. That's why we do that. One of the things is that you don't have to go on the calendar to do, to run stuff. There are people in the Gauntlet G+ channel, and if you're on the Gauntlet Slack, that do pick up games like 1 or 2 or 3 weeks out, and so that's fine to do that.
Like, hey, I forgot I have the day off on President's Day.
Yes, yeah, we get a lot of that around the holidays. People doing pickup games. Because they suddenly realize that nobody's running on Christmas Eve and they have nothing to do. We got that this year.
And I just wanted to put a fine point on it for you, Lloyd. When it comes to saving a spot for someone, all you have to do practically is reduce the max number of users you want by 1.
Mm-hmm.
So if you plan on having 4 players, but one of them is going to be reserved, you just put 3 in there. Then only 3 people can sign up through that RSVP. You'll have that spot.
Yeah, and that's certainly the easiest way to do that. Other questions about Gauntlet or running online? Is there any filtering for who gets into the games? No, we don't have any kind of filter for that right now. I usually go through and I check who's signed up like beforehand, and if it's not somebody that I know, I will go and maybe check them on G Plus or so on to get a sense of that. And it could be an issue. One of the things is that if you're running for the Gauntlet, and I recommend this for anybody running online, especially with strangers, is you have some safety tools. We use the X card typically as a safety tool when we run online. A very basic thing. We've got some guidelines for that on the Gauntlet RPG website. Talks about our inclusivity policy and our safety tools there, which I'll make sure I put a link to in the comments. So far, we haven't had any major issues. That will change. I know that at some point we will have the issues. Gauntlet Con was a very open game, and there were a couple people that we did talk to between sessions about their play style. But that was very, very minor. Much like if you're running at a convention, as a GM, you have full right to boot someone. If someone is disrupting the game, you're welcome to remove them from that. That is absolutely your right. How much time do you typically leave for players to sign in before you start without them? That's a really interesting question. I usually give people about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. I do try to talk a little bit about what we're doing and answer questions during that period. But that's especially tough when you're doing character creation in a session. If you're not doing character creation and the setup is easy, you can start sooner. But I'd say no more than 10, 15 minutes because it's other people's time then. And that's a chunk off of a relatively narrow window of time that you have to play with them. I'm not going to answer Lloyd's question there that he's put there. We do have a lot of games that fill quickly, that people are hotshot GMs like Rich and Jason and Michael and some of the other people there are people that sign up for games. They're exciting games that are out there. If the game is filled, we have wait lists on that Gauntlet events site. I highly recommend you put yourself on the wait list. I've been running Mutineer Zero for the last couple months on Wednesdays, and I'd say, I think once we've gotten here into February, we've had people from the wait list who's moved up to the game in every single session. So that is a thing to do and to keep an eye out on. Michael pointed out to me that you can use the toolbox function to eject people from the call if you need to remove them from that. Typically, I run games on a weeknight for about 2.5 hours with a kind of 15-minute margin of error on that. On the weekends, I run for 3 hours. Now, that's sort of an average length. I would say most people are running 2.5 or 3 hours. For me, it's I can't stand being in front of the computer and running for more than 3 hours. When we hit that 3-hour mark, I'm like, I can't take this anymore. But some people do run 2-hour sessions, and some people do run 4-hour sessions. If you do that, I recommend that you mention that in your game's description. Are there any kind of games that Gauntlet favors? I would say we've generally got a lot of story games and indie games. So we've got a lot of PBTA. We've got a lot of Dungeon World. We've got a lot of Voodoo, World of Dungeons, all of that kind of thing. But really important, people are also running trad stuff to try it out, to see how it works. This next month, I'm running All Cipher System from Monty Cook. That's a little more trad. It's still got a lot of looseness, but there's a lot of detail and a lot of rules and a lot of character stuff in that. I've also run the 2D20 system from Modifius, which has a lot of moving parts, both the Conan and the Star Trek game. So people are trying those out. And so any kind of game is welcome, and to see what people's response is. I've managed to fill those games. I have had other games that have not filled. For example, I tried to run Blood and Honor by John Wick, the samurai game, and you could hear the wind rushing by. No signups for that. One sign up for that one, but yeah. One of the things is because it's open table, that means that anybody can sign up, and it also means that you may have different players from session to session. So that's a really important consideration to have. Your game should be friendly to that. You should know what you're going to do if you have to slot in new players. That's a little more challenging for longer ongoing games like Mutant Year Zero that I've run on Wednesdays. We're now into session 9. I'm going to be running Blades in the Dark in the second quarter, and that's going to be a long-term game. Both of those games have a central hub, the arc or the gang that you can build on, and so it's easier to bring people in and out, but you need to consider that. I would say that if you're interested in running something, you should try and run it and see if people want to try it out. That's Maria's run Godbound. Godbound is an OSR game, high-powered. I've run that, and it's different than a lot of the other things that we're playing. One of the things is if you're looking at the Google, the Gauntlet Hangouts calendar, and you're checking out events or you're making events, all of that, the time that you're seeing is your time if you have set your time up correctly. What it does is it looks at your Google account and it reads your Google account, what time zone it's in, and it shows you the time in that. Where we've had some problems is where someone has had a second device that is not properly set up. We had somebody who was seeing different times because they hadn't set their time zone correctly up on their phone. And so it wasn't reading it correctly for them there. But generally, you're going to see what the time is in your time zone. You should always look at what the actual calendar time says. If somebody writes it in their description, sometimes they forget to write like Eastern Standard or something like that. I would look at the time zone in the actual sort of notes where it appears on the calendar. What else? So one of the things that I do, this is a good question. How do you design adventures that allow for regular changes in who plays? So what I try to do is if I'm usually running like 2 shots or 4 shots. Those are the standard things. I will look and see what the change-up is going to be. For example, Hearts of Wulin, been running that in February. I knew that I wasn't going to have one of the players for session 3. They're going to be back for 4. I knew that one of the players wasn't going to show up for session 4. And so I talked with them ahead of time for that. I think one of the best way to do that is to at the start, when you're talking about the game, when you're sharing that with the players, you say, hey, we may have some people drop in and out. This is kind of how we're going to do that. I think it requires that you're running games that are a little more open or sandboxy on the one hand, that have that flexibility to bring people in. On the other hand, if you're running a dungeon crawl, like we played Blue Medusa, and in that case, we just kind of blue flashed in. And because it was a dungeon crawl, because it was that was a tool that the GM used. Sometimes what I'll do is if I know there's going to be some switch out and change up, I'll make sure I mention that the group is like slightly larger than the actual players that we're seeing. So blue flash. Okay. What that meant is that they magically appeared. In the case of the Blue Medusa dungeon crawl, People fell out of the floor. They fell out of magic mirrors. They vanished into the floor. That the place was crazy, and the magics just kind of threw them around. If the reality of your game sets up for that, you can certainly do that. What I've done sometimes is when a new player comes in, I suggest, especially if it's a party thing, that this is a person that that was an NPC in the background. Or let me take another example for Kuro, which is a Japanese J-horror cyberpunk mystery game that I ran. We had Tyler appear in the second session, and they'd already investigated some. I suggested that he was an expert that they could go and consult. And so I hard framed him and connected him into the scene there. And so that was a way to do that. I think it's less about designing the adventures to fit and more about, as a GM, going, okay, what's going to happen this session? Who am I going to have? How do I bring that in? And talking with them about what they're comfortable with.
I know it sounds weird, but if you just have someone come in and just pretend that they've been there the whole time, it sounds weird, like, oh, how does this fit into my story? But then, like, 5 minutes later, you're just playing, and it's not even a big deal anymore. So I might just think about doing that too.
One of the tools that I do is I make sure that if we have a new player come in, I have everybody give their 30-second or 1-minute pitch of who their character is. That's an important bit. So the other players don't assume that they've watched the previous session. Never make that assumption. Have everybody do that. And then, if possible, ask the player a couple of leading questions about, how do you know Bob? Or what happened when you rescued Sherry? Or those kinds of things. Establish and ask a couple of those relationship questions. I think it's really important. It gives the person a chance to introduce themselves. It creates a connection between the PCs. In an off Gauntlet game I ran, not this last Monday, but the Monday before, I kind of thrown people in the middle of things without doing any kind of those relationship maps or any kind of questions. And you could tell that game was led. These players, they were all playing in their own, lane, and they were not interacting with one another. And because I hadn't taken that time to stop off and build that relationship map and those connections, even 20, 30 minutes would have rescued that. But yeah, it was a kind of painful session there. So if you have signed up for a game on the Gauntlet, one of the things is that you'll get an email about your RSVP. You can use that as the basis to add that to your calendar. If you need to cancel, you can go to the event page and essentially cancel out. It's very easy to do. We ask that you try, if a schedule thing is going to happen, that you try to cancel your RSVP to sign up as early as you can. If you're not sure, give other people a chance to sign up. Give other people on the wait list a chance to get on there. That's the easy side of things. As a player, it's very easy. Let's say you're running for us and something happens, a personal event, or in the case of me, I managed to fall down and injure myself before one of the games, as Lloyd will remember. And in that case, it is possible to cancel. Make sure that as soon as you know that's going to happen, you reach out to the players and tell them that you're not going to be able to run. People understand that. Contact them via email, tell them, and also mark that on. I would edit the event and mark that it's canceled. I think that's really important there. I would also, if you have a cancellation like that, you might mention it on the Gauntlet Slack channel in case other GMs would like to step in and take your spot, or if anybody could offer you assistance on that. So what techniques are considered normal form in Gauntlet games. You played in Gauntlet Con, and every game did pronouns followed by X card and veils. So that's not every game. At the minimum, we ask that every GM who's running use some kind of safety tool. That they use that, they present it to the group, at least in that first session. If they have new players come in later sessions, they remind people that they're using it. There are a number of different choices. We've got veils is one way. I use the X card because it's probably the simplest of the current safety tools in there. It's not the richest. It's not the one that's the deepest. It doesn't allow for addressing or talking about the issues until the end. But given the narrow time frame, it's the one I go for because it is the quickest one to use. I am very bad about asking pronouns, and that's something I need to get better about because we do have some players in the group who go by non-standard pronouns, who go by plural pronouns, things like that, and that is something I should ask. I should also ask about the pronouns of the actual PCs in case they're going non-standard on that. So it's not something that's required, but it's good practice, I would say. Does that seem fair? Michael, do you want to talk anything about safety tools?
Yeah. So as far as safety tools go, I also use the X card. I also do a little lines and veils discussion at the start of things. Also, just when I'm talking about tone, I might say something like, this game is PG-13 or something. Well, what does that mean? New play. I try to just bring up the X card every session too, just to keep it fresh in people's minds, because one of the limitations of being online is you don't have that physical table space. You don't have a physical X card you can touch. So, and you also don't have a really good means of using like the support flower, if you've heard of that tool, where it's like the red, yellow, green type stuff. So X tool is useful. Lines of veils are useful. Just bringing it up can make people feel a little bit more comfortable because they're playing with strangers online, and that can be kind of a little hairy. So especially if you have new players, just talking about it can make people feel supported. Even if the card doesn't come up, knowing that it's there is helpful. You can also use like script change is another popular one too. That has like a little bit more writer's room approach to things where it's like, well, let's fast forward. That's kind of like fading to black, or let's rewind. I didn't like that content. Let's change it up. Whatever you decide, as long as you have something to make people feel supported. Pronouns, it's a little bit tougher without Toolbox, because one of the great things about having that lower third is you can pop your pronoun in there right away without having to ask that question directly, right? You can have the pronoun for your character and your player. One thing I find useful is having a character sheet, right, that everyone shares and looks at, like through Google Sheets or spreadsheets or whatever. And then you have the cells for character name and player name, right? When you have those cells, just put in their character name, parentheses, pronoun, right? And player name, parentheses, pronoun. And then you don't have to come out directly and ask someone, what's your pronoun? If that's a question you're uncomfortable with. But I think, again, it's just a matter of making people feel supported, right? Even if everyone in the group uses one same pronoun, right? Even if you're playing with a bunch of bearded dudes, right? Just saying that helps the Gauntlet seem like more of a welcoming community, especially if you're recording games. That's something I'm bad with too, Lowell. I'm working on getting better with that. But if you're recording your games and putting them out there, putting that Hangout stamp on there, I think it's important to do some of these things to kind of be a good ambassador of the community. Yeah. And point it out, like, for other people, because it's easy to, especially if you're playing with that bearded dude, to forget that he's playing, Angela or whoever, right, the female, or especially if you're playing a non-binary character, if you're a non-binary person, it's easy for people to forget they or whatnot. It might feel a little awkward at first to point out, like, oh, hey, by the way, my character uses they, or my character uses he. You can tell that to other players. Oh, by the way, that character is they or he. Again, it's just to show solidarity and support for those people. So, but I don't think anybody's going to necessarily bust their chops for it. You know, that's part of the support as well.
There are two things that you mentioned there that I want to swing back to, Michael. One is that having that tone discussion at the beginning of any game that you run online is really important. Jason has talked online a little bit about this CATS that you walk through, where essentially you work through concept, aim, tone, and subject matter in the first 5 minutes to explain that to the potential players. I think that's a really good strategy. I mentioned when I put the X card out there on the table that tone is something that you can X card for. If somebody is off tone from the game that you've established at the beginning, players can X card that. And I think that's worth having, because you may have written the best description of your game possible, but people may not have read it, or they may not understand what your intent is. And I think it's worth spelling that out. Again, because you are online. If you're going for jokesy, then say that. And tone's a good one to come back to at the end of session to talk about whether you think that the game held to the tone or whether things need to be changed on that. So yeah, have that conversation, because if you come in and you're planning on running Cult, a horror show thing, you want to tell people ahead of time that that's what you're planning for, and make sure that everybody is on board with that. And you have to have that discussion with them about it, so that they are ahead of the game. The other thing I want to mention, and then I'm going to swing back to some end things, is I want to show. Let me get the screen share up on this. People always ask me about how to do character sheets, and online. Roll20 has some great pre-made character sheets, and sometimes I'll use those to back up Google Hangouts. I don't use the video or audio from Roll20, but I use it as a place to show tokens, a place to put maps, and a place where really awesome character sheets have been built. If I don't do it there, typically what I'm doing is what Michael mentioned, and that's building a spreadsheet with a Google Doc, and I'll show you what that looks like here. So here's an example. This is the spreadsheet from Hearts of Wulin. And you can see I've got the various bits and pieces, got their entanglements, got their moves. I do that on one sheet. And then we'll have a tab for people to put NPC pictures in. And then for PBTA, for example, I'll put details like the basic moves on a tab and the other moves on a tab. You do not have to be that elaborate. Do not have to be. You can have just the basic, character sheet without any color, things like that. You can just have the basics. If you're thinking about building a character sheet and you're like, I don't know where to start, ask on the Gauntlet. Say, has anybody already built a sheet for this game? Or has anybody built a sheet that's like this game? For example, this sheet you may see here, this is a third-generation ripoff of one of Rich Rogers' sheets. Originally, I stole one of his mask sheets, and then I redid it for another purpose. And this is like the third iteration of my having stolen from that original sheet that he built. And if anybody ever needs any help figuring out how to automate things, how to have things call from other places, or how to do like these checkboxes that I've got here, I'd be glad to answer questions and help people out with that. The Gauntlet Hangouts G+ community, there's a Play Aids folder that you can find there if you go to the G+ thing, and it has a ton of sheets and cheat sheets and things that people have already made for different games. And if you've built something cool, add it to there. A lot of it's PBTA, but there are some other things that are on there. I'll end that screen sharing. Another question that was asked is roses and thorns. One of the things that we try to do is some debrief. And the way that I've done it is I use the roses and thorns as something that Rich taught me. And I typically do it if I'm doing a 2-shot. I'll do it at the end of the second session. I'll tell people that I'm going to take the last 10, 15 minutes for it. Rich does it every session. Rich gets feedback every session because he's a masochist. And he does it, and it's scary. It took me a long time to get used to doing roses and thorns. So what roses and thorns is essentially at the end of the session, take that 10, 15 minutes and you say, what I want to do is I want to first go around and do thorns and have everybody say something that they didn't like, or they wanted to see more of, or they weren't certain about, or they were unhappy with. And I start with me. I start with me, and it can be about the system. It can be about play. It can be about interactions with other players. And that tool is made as a chance to say that. If I'm a GM and somebody criticizes me for something in that, I don't answer back. I don't argue. Good etiquette is to listen, nod, acknowledge, and support what they've said and consider how it can help you. If you want to see a harsh but good feedback, watch Rich in any one of my games in the Roses and Thorns. Rich goes and says, this is what I did not dig. This is what I did not enjoy. And he's made me a better GM for having done that. I go first, and I make sure everybody has a chance to do that, those thorns. You'll have players who will say, oh, I don't have anything. I'll try to push them to give me something, even a minor thing. Often players will say, I wasn't happy with what I did, and express reservations about their own play. Sometimes they'll talk about the system, and I think that's fair. It's a good way to find out where it isn't working. And then once you've done the thorns, then you do the roses, and that's where everybody says something good. And you always do that last so you walk away happier. Michael, it looked like you had a question.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to comment about thorns because I found that I've generally been I still haven't reached that comfort level in the Gauntlet community where I feel comfortable stating thorns outright. Like I like you just mentioned, I usually fall back on just saying something about my own performance rather than someone else's. And I've been contemplating this as I've been gearing up to present an event. And I wonder if one possible way to make it easier for people to provide criticism without feeling like they may be directly attacking someone is to I wonder if a simple rephrasing of questions could be helpful. Like I've thought about asking, rather than asking what are thorns or what you didn't like, I've thought about maybe reconfiguring it as asking, like, what happened? Did anything happen that you didn't expect? Now that could be a good thing because people love surprises in gaming, but it could also be another way, an indirect way of asking, well, are there ways that the game session didn't go that you were expecting it to go based on what had happened before? And sometimes that could be kind of a roundabout way to get people to talk about things that could be weaknesses or drawbacks and how you've run a game session. I don't know if other people have experiences like that or have thought of different ways of eliciting that kind of feedback, but that's just something that's been running through my head.
I think that's a great idea. I think you should definitely try that. You should do whatever kind of feedback system works for you. I think it's great to have any kind of conversation about that. And I like the way that you're doing that, that you ask them a different form of question. So yeah, I think that's great. Some people don't do feedback. Jason generally does a kind of an end session chat. He does it very loosely, which I think is cool. And he'll often ask people, what did you want to see more of? And that's a great hook. It's a great setup for the next session. Was there anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to see more of? And I think that's a fair question. Sometimes people we have a Discord channel, and sometimes GMs will go and set up a room on the Discord channel to talk audio there and to do a debrief. And they'll usually mention that on the Slack channel. And anyone's welcome to join in and listen or comment in any of those debriefs. And that's another reasonable tool.
I do Roses and Thorns. I'm a pretty inexperienced GM. I'm often playing with people who have a lot more experience than I do. And what I always do is like try to couch the feedback like ahead of time, like saying like, hey, I'm learning. I want to be making games better and better. I want our next session to go even more amazing. What are some things that you like? What are some things you want to see more of? What are some things you didn't like that I can avoid in the future? And sometimes just like saying like I want it, it's helpful for people who are afraid of being critical or negative or whatever. And even just saying like, hey, if you have any other feedback, reach out to me, during the week or something. I've had a player, kind of send me a more long form bit of feedback that he had to offer through email. And yeah, it was easier to kind of process that and think about that and learn from that. There might come a case where somebody's complaining about something that, like if they're saying something like, oh, well, it was kind of annoying having to, use the right pronouns with everybody. It really took me out of the game. That I might take that feedback and say, okay, and then like file that into the warehouse of stuff I'm not worried about. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you're taking criticism, be affirmatory.
Yeah.
And take it in. You don't have to respond or rise or anything like that. That's the best way to handle that. That question that you just asked there, and it's a little bit like what Michael Mendoza mentioned. That question of what do you want to see is a really good one for running online. If you're running like just 2 sessions for people or 4 sessions or just a real narrow thing, you don't have much time to give them the awesome. So one of the things I've been more explicit about is what's a scene you want to have your character do? What's something you expect your character to do, to play in? What do you want? And it's kind of a meta question, and it steps outside of the game, but it's worth doing. And then say, I may not get to that, but I'm going to keep that in mind. I'm going to try to lean into that. I try to do that. We're playing 7th Sea now, and that's a big question, is to give me a sense of what your character is. What are the scenes you definitely want to have before we get done with this game? Lloyd, now you just ran your first sessions of the Gauntlet with masks, correct?
Yes, I did, actually.
And what was your experience with that, Mr. Gahn?
Well, like being an amazing GM myself, there was no problem whatsoever and everything turned out fine. I'm lying. So it was a off the books game. So I didn't do an invite for it. I only advertised it about maybe 2 weeks before I was going to do it. Mm-hmm. So I did it through Need Players instead of doing it to the Gauntlet Hangouts. There was no event like that. We had 3 players who turned up and were absolutely amazing. And it's a game of mass. So I was like, mass is a game that I can comfortably run with my eyes closed. Because it's like one of those things that I really like the game. So it's just, there's young superheroes. What would you want? Just throw some things at them and then do their own thing. And the game went out really well. What made actually, I'll answer that question in a second, Michael. Just hold on one sec. What made the game really strong is that we built the characters on the spot. So everyone made their characters in the moment. They sort of put things together. And they basically went, all right, Lloyd, these are characters and these are connections. And they were like, run the game for us. And then they went, oh, also, we're setting the game in Lisbon because you know what? F you, Lloyd. Why not? What? You're from Europe? We're all from Europe. Let's set the game in Europe instead of anywhere else. And the Gauntlet games that I've only been able to play in have always been like that, where there's been a bunch of people from around the world I've been in. Usually it's very America-focused in online gaming. So I was really glad I was able to play to a whole bunch of people who basically weren't from the US. Even though one technically was nearby. But that's what I really enjoyed about it the most. It was really nice to play a game with people who knew the score, turned up, knew what they wanted to do, went for it. It was almost like con prep. So online cons always have this thing because people turn up, they're like, I'm ready to game, I know what's going on, I understand how this works, and go for it. And you don't get that very often to sit down games where everyone just turns up ready to go. In this case, they were, and it worked out. And to answer Michael's question, I can't actually answer that question because I didn't really prep for the museum scene. It just sort of happened around me, and I just went with it. So I can't really help you on that one. I'll answer it later on, but I don't think it's part of the subject at the moment. But what really matters is that I managed to get everyone together. I did an X card, which was a little bit harder to do. That's what I was going to ask. I just realized. So the X card is great, but the way it's done is the problem I have. Because online, if you go like this, and I have 3 screens, and I don't see you do this, I'll miss it. So I put a message in the chat, because I'll always skip back to that chat and see it. So it'll be like, boop, X. Only problem is, because this is 2018, one of us was playing through an iPad. So, 1, I can't do this to see it. 2, I can't do that to see it. So I actually had to have them use their Hangouts personal chat, because every window you have has a chat with it, and put the X in there, which pops up on my smartphone so I could see it that way. Which is one of those things I was like, I've really got to try and consider more things so people have more access to do and basically get a chance to actually speak to me. Because the whole point of Google Hangouts is that you should be able to just say things, and that was always difficult. Sorry, I went off kilter again. Anyway, that's what happened.
No, let me actually point out something that we have. We do have Roll for Your Party, which is a shared online dice roller that we use. And it has the ability to put dice, and everybody can see it at the same time, so you can build that die table. And it actually has an X card button in it, so you can use that as a safety tool, and it actually puts a prompt up asking you if there's particular content you want to skip by. But let me.
And I think that when you use that, it like brings that window to the front of your computer too.
Yeah, here I'll show you what it looks.
Oh, no, we actually use Roll for Your Party in the game. It's just that one of us was on an iPad and she couldn't use Roll for Your Party, and she had to use this. Hence the reason why I had this problem.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so many people are playing on different devices. It's a challenge.
That's the thing about running games on Hangouts or for Gauntlet Hangouts, is that you have to always consider that even though you put all of these things in place, X card, everyone's on time, game stuff, your level of technology might not be the same as the person you're running with. I mean, if I game from Ghana, my internet connection is not that great, so I like to have just a Hangout where we're open and use a pen for my notes. So I can't do anything else other than that. Usually I'll do it from my phone without a camera on, which is the headphones, because my home internet's good enough for me to do that with in Ghana, but not so good to do anything else. I just got a pen and paper and just like write my notes down instead. So we have to remember that tech is not the same for us or for you as it would be for other people who may be gaming with you.
That's a really good point. And check in with people about that, about what they're using, and if they're having issues with that. Another point you guys all mentioned is running online is very different in a lot of ways from running face-to-face. You don't have the half-hour BS at the table that I get with the face-to-face group. People are there. They've taken their time out. They've scheduled it. They won a game. So you want to get jumping into the game ASAP, and you keep moving. You keep things going at a brisk pace. I have 2.5 hours. I take a break, a 5-minute break at the midpoint, and I end, if we do Roses and Thorns, we're ending 10 minutes early or so to do that. But otherwise, I keep things going. Which when I'm at face-to-face group, I'm a little less, making that motion. I'm giving the scenes a little more time to breathe. Now, your group may vary. If you've played with people a lot, if you know them really well, like for a while I was running Wednesday night group that had been playing together for years, and they were very comfortable with the chatting and BS. But you need to gauge that, what the group it is, what the comfort level is, because that was a serious change for me, not having the time to kind of pause and take the breaks while the players all talked about that how many times they went to Taco Bell this week or whatnot. That kind of thing, or discuss the 8 flavors of Mountain Dew that we had in the basement. You know, that kind of thing. Oh yeah, we have 8 flavors of Mountain Dew in the basement. Welcome to America.
Just to piggyback off that, for me, pacing is something that's very tough and ephemeral still. I'm still figuring out. I think it's something that maybe is more intuitive or kind of comes from experience. I'm always trying to keep an eye on the clock. I really highly value people's time, you know, as far as like, I don't like a game to run over if I can avoid it in any way. If I have a feeling it's going to, or if our feedback session has to happen after time, I'm always like, hey, are you folks okay with going a little over time for feedback? If not, you can pop out or whatever. But do you have any other tips for keeping pace?
Yes, I do, because I'm just going to talk a lot. Number one, early on in the game session, we don't do initiative in a lot of our story games, but we kind of need to keep an order. Early on, kind of figure out what order you're going to be asking people things. I'm going to go Michael, and I look at where the little camera things are here, the little images, and I usually follow that in some way. Once you've got that order for the session, stick with it. Don't so that players know, okay, Lloyd just went, so he's probably going to call on me next. Model that order early and try and stick with it. It can switch up from time to time. You know, two players may be together in a scene or whatnot, but I do try to keep that order together. One of the other things I do is, especially if we're in a scene where there's a lot of cuts, I do try to cut early. What Rich does is Rich will have you roll for a move, like with PBTA. Okay, make your roll. Oh, you got this result? Okay, we're going to come back to you and find out what happens. And then he'll cut to the next person. And that's a great way to do it. Cutting early, cutting fast, moving back and forth. Another thing I'll do, especially if I feel like it's taken a little bit of time to get around everybody in an action scene, I will say, okay, Lloyd, what's your action? Michael, I'm going to come to you next. To say, hey, I'm aware of how much time people are getting. I want you to be ready when I come to you. That's a technique I'll often use, is say, or I'll say, okay, I'm going to work with Michael and Justin right now, and then when I'm done, I'm going to come over here and talk to Asher, and explicate the order of presentation. I want to model as early as possible for the players that they are all going to get their time. They're all going to have their spotlight. I know who they are. I'm going to call on them. We're going to do that. Because one of the things I've sometimes played with players online is they've played in games where they've had to sit for 45 minutes. And so they're really hungry for their scene. And they can get pushy. So I try to make sure, hey, we're gonna do this. Here's another thing, another online tip that Rich taught me that I only learned last year. Some of you will be nodding when I say this. When you ask a question, never ask a general question to the group. So early on, you may have heard in the early part of this thing, I said, does anybody have any questions? And we got radio silence. Nobody had any questions. I didn't. You'll get that same thing if you say, okay, what does the group want to do next? The way to do that is you need to go, okay, you guys need to think about where you want to go next, what you want to do. And I would go, let's start with you, Justin. What do you think we should do next? When you ask a question, point it to somebody. If you see somebody who's perked up, and looks like they have an answer, that's the person to go to. But don't ask vague questions. Vague questions will drop the momentum that you have in the game. It will just peter things out. So ask specific name questions. Does that seem fair?
Yes, but can I cut in for a slight?
Absolutely. Yes.
I mean, since we're slightly GM masterclass.
Right, absolutely. You can have a counterpoint. We've talked about 2d20 and its relative strengths and merits and so on. So, okay. Go on, Lloyd.
My point was that there are situations where you want to do something like that, and it's a technique I tend to use, which is trying to see which players are more assertive than others. if you start a game, put everyone in position, and you go, what would you guys like to do? And someone instantly jumps on it, you know that person is going to be a more assertive. So you know that the other two you can work on to bring into a scene, because the other character will bring themselves in whenever they need to. And it's kind of like a little bit of a cheat thing you could do, see who you should probably focus more on. I just thought just put it in there, just in case you wanted to try it that way. So carry on.
No, that's a great technique that you could use sparingly to draw that out, to assess the group, because you are, especially if you're coming into a table where you don't know everybody, you don't know what the dynamics are. I mean, it's the same thing at a convention. If you're face to face at a con, you need to, within the first 10 minutes as a GM, assess, okay, you know, who's the drama queen, you know, who's the one who's going to push forward on things, who looks like I may have to pull them out from their shell. Have to make those assessments very, very quickly.
I saw your question earlier, Lloyd, about stuff that you want to see players do more. And I love when an assertive player brings in another character with them. If you jump in the scene, I'm doing this with so-and-so. I know we're not necessarily talking about that in this video, but
no, but it's a great point.
So that's useful too.
Yeah, if you're a player, bringing somebody in is a great thing. If you're a player, listen to what other people are saying. It is the biggest, I think the biggest obstacle for running online is that players don't hear each other as well as they do at the table. And I think as a GM, you should assume that players are hearing about 50% of what the other players are saying. And be ready to repeat things and be ready to push things together. And sometimes players will do something and you're like, okay, well, we already established that. You may need to correct them and say, hey, well, you know, this is what the scene is like. I think it's a real challenge. Another thing that sometimes happens that is a kind of a tough thing. You mentioned about bringing other players into scenes. Watch for the player that is constantly making suggestions to other players, constantly jumping in on their scenes. That's something I've seen a couple of times. They want to collaborate, they want to help out, but they're doing it so much that they're not giving the person a chance to react. That's something to be aware of and watch for. It's rarer than other things, but it's something that can be difficult to deal with. Asher, so I've only played with you once, so you've signed up for this. Do you have any particular questions that you're like, okay, I want to know about this, or something that's really in your head?
Mostly, I was curious about improving because I haven't seen many people talk about that.
Yeah, there's a number of really good books out there about playing improv. There's one of the Gnome Stew books has a collection of essays on running improv games. There's Play Unsafe by Grams Walsley is another great book on improv gaming. I will tell you a technique that I've stolen as a GM that I think is, when I remember to do it, is really good. One of them is when you introduce an NPC, always give them one weird detail, one detail that's sort of off kilter from other things, a scar or a limp or clothing that they wear that are odd. You don't have to know anything about that. You just put that out there, and it makes them a little more vivid for the players, and the players will grab onto it. And I've used that quite a bit, and it's been really successful. That I got from that Gnome Stew collection. I think the biggest thing about improv is, as a GM, is making some notes for yourself as you're running and being willing to reincorporate material that has been put on the table ahead of time. If somebody has named an NPC, if somebody has established a fact, bring it back in. Even if it seems a little goofy or a little strained, that's really a strong thing to do.
Yeah, especially with pacing, right? Like I I feel like I can improv things, but then the pacing seems off in things, right?
I don't know. You see, you've got a number of players at the table who are all kind of on that same wavelength, and I find that generally they'll rise to that and we'll get that going. It's mostly where it gets slowed down is when the mechanics then interfere with that improv.
Okay.
Leading questions is a great thing to do. Asking people to paint the scene as Jason does, or asking them, okay, you know this character, what do you know about them? Letting them collaborate and then building off of that. It's essentially like asking for a word from the audience in an improv. So I think that's a good technique. Anybody else want to say anything about that? I know we've got gifted GMs here. Lloyd?
If there's some, just to point out the improv helping thing, what game that really helped me understand improv GMing and sort of like going with the scene was actually Lady Blackbird, which, by the way, is still the greatest game of all time. John Harper, you're my god. If you ever listen to this, please call me. The thing you have to note about that is that you start with practically nothing. The players know you start with nothing. You know you start with nothing. So you both realize that you have to build some form of story and coherence to move along the plot. And because you both have the same level, you both know to take, not take liberties. Like, if the GM mentions this, you have to make sure you factor it in. And he forgets it later. If it's not too important, you don't want to bring it up because you know you had to make that on the spot. And it really helps. It's one of those games. It's almost like group workshop games where it helps you really gel your group together, because you realize that you're forming a plot line with basically nothing, and no one has any what's the phrase I'm looking for? Any responsibility to carry it forward, but you have to work on it together, and that really helps. Also, if you are having problems with improv, then one thing that always helps is to trust your players. Level of trust between you and your players, that your players won't mess you up to throw you off balance, and you wouldn't put something in they wouldn't expect that'll completely throw their plot line off balance, helps you guys improv together better. And if once you establish that level between each other, any game can go great.
And that tool of saying yes, but, or if sometimes you have to negate things, rarely, no, but, or no, and that I always try to respond in the affirmative to things that players are throwing out there, try to build on those, try to create from that. And again, those are all formal improv techniques that can get brought to the table. If you want to watch crazy improv drama that I don't know how it worked, but it did, is the most recent sessions I did of Pasión de las Pasiones, the Mexican telenovela RPG. We got a coherent story, despite us starting with just characters and a place and some moves. That thing, it ends with somebody going for the gunshot goes off, and we fade to black. But you know, it has that cliffhanger. It worked somehow, and that's all improv. And the GM, myself, just popping in from time to time to heighten the stakes, letting the players drive that. Justin, now you signed up for this you hadn't played with us before. You've been running a little bit online. What questions can I answer for you, or something that we want to talk about?
Actually, the one I really had was somewhat related to the improv, but how, aside from just doing it and practicing it, and how do you improve your storytelling?
I watch other games, and I play other games, and I looked for those. I mean, that's one of the best ways right now to look at what people are doing. I will admit, I played with Rich and Jason and some of the other people, and I made notes about what they did, and I stole mercilessly from their techniques. That's the only way I got better. Because like a couple of years ago, a bunch of these games I hadn't played, and I was still doing very, very directed planning things out, and I've gotten looser about that. So I'd say play and watching, and trying out different game systems so you can see what they're doing and what they can bring back into other games. PBTA, Fate, Lady Blackbird, these are all games that have really interesting techniques for storytelling, and you can take them back to any other game, I think. And I do think getting feedback, stopping and asking the players really concretely at the end, is also a way to find out maybe where you have some weak spots, or find out how you can tailor what you're doing to the particular play group that you have. Other people have suggestions about that? Lloyd?
Yeah, everything Lowell said, everything put in a nutshell, boom, there, he said it. I believe every GM has a niche, something that they specifically specialize in, and that's where their best games are from. And the only way you find this out is to play multiple versions of games, see what rule systems you feel comfortable with, and see what types of games you like. For example, I can never run a horror game. All my horror games turn into action adventure games, like instantly. Like Cthulhu's gonna get his ass whooped. There's nothing he can do about it. The player's gonna get some dynamite and throw it down his throat, because this is how I run games. I can't do horror. I can't do existential storyline. What I can do is mystery plot lines, multiple converging plot lines, personal stories, and crazy hijinks. That's what I do. That's like my niche. That's my bubble. That's why I can play the other games, but when I run games, that's where my strength lies. And once I figured that out, I just run many games using that. And that's how I got better at what I do. I'm okay now. I mean, I could still be better, but I mean, like, personally, I think I'm amazing, but like, no one else will tell me to my face for some unexplained reason. And I feel the more you play, once you find what it is you like, the rule systems you like, and the style you like, and you just keep doing it, the game will get better and you will improve as a GM. Also, be fabulous. Being fabulous helps.
I think it's really good to talk about the fact that you find and figure out what you do dig with games. Like, I love mystery games and I love complicated stuff, and I like having people figure things out. I like that problem solving, and I like, those things. That's what I dig. Rich does not. Rich runs wonderful NPC driven games that have great moving action, things like that, but he doesn't want to do a mystery. He doesn't like playing in mysteries and things like that. I think that I've found the niche. Like, I don't think I could run Monster Hearts. It's a great game, and when I played it, it was magnificent. But I'm not sure I could do that. I'm not sure it's in my wheelhouse. I will try it eventually, but I love action. I love cinematic action. I love action sequences. I love getting those to go fast. So I tend to lean into those kinds of things. So yeah, finding your niche is an important way. Michael, any suggestions on that? On getting better? Mr. Barford?
Just practice, like Lloyd said. Practice is really important. It just makes you feel comfortable with being in the seat in general, and I think that's going to kind of improve your storytelling. Just feeling comfortable, feeling confident helps out a lot. For me, at least, I've found.
Does that seem like a reasonable answer, Justin?
Used to using the headphone jack to mute. Yeah, I think there were some good tips in there. And it does just seem... I do watch a lot of Let's Plays, especially like Adam Goals stuff.
I would say that in addition to finding your niche, right, also play lots of other games like Lowell does, right? Lowell's always bringing a new game in on Thursdays, right? And even if it's not your best session or it's not the game for you, I bet you can learn a lot from what you didn't like too. So just run games, play games, have fun.
Lloyd, you had your hand up?
Almost forgot. Yeah, watch a lot of fucking crap movies. Watch the crap out of movies. Movies have everything you need in an hour and 30 minutes. that will tell you how a game should go. It has the beginning, has the plot, has the weird halfway through bit where everyone's feeling really down for no reason, has the like climatic finish, has the ending. Everything you need to do to run a game is in a movie. Just watch like a million of those and just copy the crap out of it. Maybe not David Lynch.
Okay, fair enough.
Watch a couple movies sort you out.
One of the questions we often get as a question about GMing and resources is how we take modules and adapt them to other systems. And I wanted Michael Barford to talk a little bit about this because of his recent experience with Shadowrun. So can you tell us about what you did with that and what you learned from adapting those things?
Yeah, so I've run 2 series now of Shadowrun, and this is actually my final session is tomorrow. Shadowrun is a game that when I very, very first got introduced into the hobby was like the first book I read, and like it made role-playing sound so cool. And there's all this cool stuff like magic and dragons and guns and all this cool stuff all in one thing. But as I've sort of like developed as a GM and player and played more games and kind of, I realized that the system of Shadowrun wasn't exactly what I wanted from a game. And that's when I found World of Shadows, which is a hack of World of Dungeons, which is a hack of Dungeon World, which is a hack of Apocalypse World, right? But I found too that not only did I not want to be rolling a whole bucket of D6 and counting out numbers to see what your results were, I also realized too that my gaming style is a little bit different from, 20, 30 years ago, what people were doing. So when it comes to adapting modules, I think the first thing you want to think about is what do you want to get from the module, right? So I think the modules can kind of serve 2 purposes. One, it can be, some of these do really have really cool and interesting stories in them, right? That there's a reason why they're legendary or successful or, mythological, right? And that's because they have cool stories in them. But sometimes, like the way that I personally run games, I am more interested in interpersonal character drama. I guess that's kind of my niche, right? I like to see characters talking about like how they feel about a situation and like what costs they have to endure in order to achieve something, right? So the module for me kind of became like a background thing. Like it's just like this the backdrop for these cool characters and them interacting, right? So first you kind of have to decide what am I using this for, right? Now if you're running like a really cool mystery or something, right, you're probably going to want to be a bit more faithful to the module. Jason Cordova, who does lots of modules and repurposes things, talks about it on Fear of a Black Dragon, right? He mentioned earlier, I think it was either on Discern Realities or even the Gauntlet podcast, but he talked about adapting or using Red and Pleasant Land, which is a Lamentations of the Flame Princess module or something.
Yeah.
And he discussed this idea. He didn't run games in a railroad, is the kind of common parlance for like a one-track story or whatever. He talked about running in a corridor, which is something I kind of tried to adapt, which is basically like there's a destination we're going to, but there's all this space around you that you can kind of, define or look at, and there's some collaboration there. But ultimately, we're kind of going towards this one destination. So that's something you can use a module for because it has that sort of end thing in mind. But I feel what I kind of came up or butted up against was this story that wants to be told versus like the story your players or the characters are going to tell. And so I think you kind of have to find a balance there, which is you're most comfortable with. Because if you're like a performative GM, like Jason, right, where you're telling this cool story, this really cool bad guy, and you're like really getting into it, that part of the story is going to take more precedence. But if you're more like, how do you feel about that? What does your character feel? Yada yada yada. That's going to take more of a side.
And a lot of the modules have really cool, interesting set pieces that you can lift as background, you know, and toss all the getting from A to Z BS sometimes that you get, and get those as the interesting rooms in the corridor.
Yeah, especially when, you know, we're talking about online. Like, so the two modules that I adapted for Shadowrun were Bug City and Renraku Arcology Shutdown, which I'd heard so much about, but had never played or experienced. I just heard people on forums talk about how cool they were. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. Come to find out that those books are less modules and more like campaign source books. So it was like, both of these books were saying like, you can use this book to have a whole campaign. And I'm like, I have 4 sessions, right? So stealing set pieces is huge. You look for the coolest parts of the book that you want to include, and just have those ready. And that can be part of the vaunted Gauntlet prep 731, where you have like 7 NPCs or set pieces or whatever cool things that you can drop in. I'd also recommend, if your playstyle is something that's a bit more indie or story focused, where it's like looking for player contribution or collaborative world building or something, use Mad Libs in a sense, right? So like, you want to use those establishing questions, and you want to use what players say. So it's like, you have like a rival, right? Leave a little blank space in one of your 7 people, you know, like what their name is, right? And use what that player said, and then you have that NPC ready to go. Another thing too, World of Dungeons has this Die of Fate mechanic, which I think might be stolen from Burning Wheel or something like that, where it's just like, you come to something that you are unaware of or are unsure what's going to happen here, you just roll the Die of Fate. If it's low, it's bad. If it's high, it's good. And then you can, if you have as part of your prep, like, here's some bad things that can happen, here's some good things that can happen, that can help you if you have trouble with improv, right? And that's where modules can be supportive. If you have trouble coming up with stuff on the spot, that's where prep can help. I also just ask the players to, like, what happens, you know? But you don't want to rely on that too much, because that can be a little bit of a burden.
Yeah.
So
never feel bad about feasting on the bones of a module, just taking what you want from it and stealing out the good parts.
Yeah, that's 100% what I would do.
We're at the sort of end of time here, that we have an hour and a half, so we're at the end of this. I do want to say one thing about two things about running online. One is, you do have a lot of space here. You've got space to move, you've got space to come at the camera. You've actually got some real estate to work in, even though sometimes you feel like you're boxed in, like you can't be expressive. Remember that you can lean in, you can do voices. All of that is your space. The other thing I'll say is more of a general thing about GMs. I think GMs are their own worst enemies sometimes. You run a session, you come away going, oh, God, that just did not the way to go I wanted. Your players are loving it. And they say, oh, we had a great time. And you're like, oh, no, you guys are just lying. It happens to me all the time. You're good, you're good GMs. And you have to accept that. And it's hard to do sometimes. That's why I love that Lloyd embraces that he is a good GM and is willing to say that, which he is. And I think we should all aspire to that, to recognizing the good work that we do. Because it's so much easier to beat yourself up after a session and not think that you did a good job. So I'm actually going to stop us here. We're at time. I want to thank you all for coming and being here for this. I really appreciate that, for taking this time to do that. If anybody has any questions or follow up or wants to talk about this with me, you can hit me up. Send me a Gmail or G+. I'd be glad to talk with people one-on-one on a Hangout or whatnot. If you want assistance, just reach out to me, and I'd be glad to do that. Or if you want to geek out on Shadowrun with Michael Barford, it's all good. So thank you all very much, and I'm going to stop the broadcast.